All right, Daily Ticker Time on a Tuesday, brought to you as always by our great friends at Pelican Brewing. 4 locations along the Oregon coast. Fly over to a Pelican location. Enjoy epic views, local brews all year long. Pelican Brewing looks forward to seeing you at the coast. Joining us now is a man raised in the shadows of Pelican Brewing, our good friend, the columnist at the Oregonian, Bill Oram, at Bill Oram on Twitter. Go give him a follow. Bill, good morning to you. I got a million different ways that we could start here. We were just talking, reminding ourselves that you were at the Joe Cronin press conference about nothing after the trade deadline because the Blazers didn't make a move. And I wanted to ask you about that. Let's start, though, with the news out of your paper this past weekend that the Civil War in football is going to be continued. I'm curious where you're at on that, where the appetite is for that, you think amongst fans, and how we feel about Oregon and Oregon State continuing to play the rivalry game in September, which is still very weird.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting subject just because I've spent a lot of time going back and forth on it myself because I think it's so just essential to the state that the schools play each other in football. And you know, I think that is such a cultural pillar of the state, and being an Oregonian and being a Duck or a Beaver. That said, the programs are in such different places right now that it's really hard to see that game being what it has been. But I do think that once we get kind of past the feelings of the split, and once, you know, Oregon State stabilizes a little bit in this new Pac-12, I do think that game is going to be something that both sides still want and value. It makes me sad to think that it's more than likely not going to be played at least for a few years. But I do wonder if in the long run that those few years could serve as a bit of a cooling off period and a chance for Oregon State to get stabilized. And then you bring it back at the end of the decade when there might be a real appetite for it, as opposed to now when it's mostly just a lot of hurt feelings. So, I mean, both sides have been really adamant throughout that there is a desire on both sides to continue the series, and I think that's sincere. But Oregon is in a place where with their schedule, it's going to be really difficult to do from 26 through 28, and maybe that's a good thing in the long run.
Yeah, I tend to be somebody that's like at the back end of what you said there. Like if it takes 5 to 10 years for conference stuff to settle and we have a clear understanding of the landscape, maybe reignite the talks. I have no appetite for this game. Now, I also grew up with this game. I went to this game as a student, and I can't speak for everybody. We all have different thoughts. You have people in your life where you still feel like this is a big, important state cultural thing? Because I feel like that died last year.
I think it is kind of on a year-by-year basis. But, I mean, at the game last year, I felt an energy. I felt, you know, I walked through the tailgates at the game last year in Corvallis, and, you know, there was still the half and half tailgates, and it was, you know, Beavers and Ducks. Like, the energy around the game felt the same to me. But if it's going to be, I mean, what was the score last year, Brandon? 45 to 20?
Yeah, something like
49-14 was the
49-14, yeah.
49-14. You know, if it's going to be 49-14 or a 4-touchdown blowout, you know, every year, obviously the desire is going to fade. I mean, but it, you know, especially Oregon doesn't want to take a game that is, you know, on an annual basis that, you know, it doesn't do anything for their schedule, and Oregon State doesn't want to take a beating every year either. So I do think that there's going to have to be a kind of a regular reconsideration. That said, I don't think Oregon State is going to fade into nothingness of football. I mean, this is a transitional period, and we do not know how long it's going to take, but I think Oregon State is going to get back on its feet. There has been obviously over the last 2.5 decades, a track record of finding a way to build back up to competitive and better. And I think that will happen again. It's just a matter of figuring out how to navigate these circumstances. That doesn't mean that they're going to suddenly be able to compete financially and with NIL and house ruling funds with the Oregons of the world. But I do think that you're going to see a program that is able to hold its own.
Yeah, you got to have hope on both sides of the rivalry in order for it to matter to the fan bases, and we'll see how long it takes to get to that point. To your point, and maybe that's a handful of years down the road. Bill Oram is our guest, columnist of the Oregonian. You can go give him a follow on Twitter at Bill Oram. You wrote a great piece a couple of weeks back about an Oregon basketball player who got hurt, Bartholomew, who came back and is back from injury. went down last year when the football team was getting celebrated on the court. It was a very complicated thing and an interesting piece to read because I kind of forgotten that happened. I'm just curious what you make of Oregon basketball. They get Northwestern tonight. He's returned from injury. They're sinking like a stone. Their tournament dopes are evaporating in front of our very eyes.
Quad one wins, though,
Quad
Andy.
one wins, or that was a long time ago. What do we make of Oregon basketball and them sinking like a stone?
Yeah, I mean, the quad one wins are their life vests right now that are keeping them somewhat afloat on the bubble. I mean, otherwise, you'd look at the last 3 weeks and toss them out. I mean, this is an important week. These are 2 winnable games at home, Northwestern and Rutgers. But I mean, Northwestern's like 50-something in net. Rutgers has 2 top 3 picks in the NBA draft. This is not these are not gimme games. But I think Oregon's got to have them if they're gonna stay in the mix. And it's one of those, what do I make of them? I don't know, other than we have seen Dana Altman teams have real swoons every year. And this Duck team has been kind of hot and cold. And there's obviously tons of talent, with the players they brought in, but Nate Biddle hasn't been able to sustain what he was doing at the beginning of the year. They're really 3-point dependent, and that can go away. So, I don't know. I mean, this is a team that probably played above its heads early on. I was really surprised when the Ducks, had some early season success. They entered the AP poll at at 9 or something like that. Right. And I was like, where is that coming from? That felt astronomically high. And then they kind of worked their way back from there. This is probably a back end, at its peak, this is probably a top 25 team, but not a top 10 team. And I wasn't ever sure exactly where that point of view came from.
Oregon State is 5th in the WCC. What do we make of them? Because right now it feels like while Oregon is sinking, Oregon State can't win a road game. They just get blown out by St. Mary's. I don't know. Their record feels a little fake to me, given who they've beaten and who they've lost to. What do you make of Oregon State's hoops team?
It's kind of the same, right? Probably a little bit inflated. I think it was a necessary development for Wayne Tinkle's team to have, a positive step forward after where the last few years have gone, losing all the players in the transfer portal. I think that the Beavers did a really good job of finding players to sort of pick up the slack and kind of start over with because, it is a year-to-year situation in college basketball. You don't know who's going to be able to stick around. So I thought they did a good job of getting experienced veteran players. DeMarco Minor, has been really good. I love Parsifala. Obviously, Michael Ratai is sort of the heart of that team. So I thought they did a good job of building a roster. But again, what is the end game here? Are you a top 25 team? Obviously, you want to make the tournament. But the WCC is a good league. And for the most part, the Beavers are kind of slotting in where you would expect them to be in the WCC. Even with a down Gonzaga team, they got hammered by Gonzaga on the road. I mean, obviously a signature win at home, get hammered by St. Mary's, and then you're sort of kind of in the middle and can't win road games, like you said. I mean, you're losing at Loyola Marymount and San Francisco. I mean, those are just middle of the pack WCC teams, which is kind of where the Beavers are. They're in the middle.
Yeah. Bill Oram, our guest, columnist at the Oregonian. You were at the Joe Cronin press conference last week. I know a lot of people made the joke of like, well, why is there going to be a press conference? They didn't do anything. But there was interesting anecdotes that came out of it. You got a couple of questions in. Last night, DeAndre Ayton goes down, and we don't have an answer on how long that's going to be and the severity of that injury. But I know a lot of Blazer fans are curious to get that information. What did you make of the lack of activity at the deadline, holding on to their cards, and the way this thing looks maybe over the next 7 to 8 months going into the offseason?
It is a fascinating moment for the Blazers because they've played their way out of the real top of the lottery chase. They already have too many wins to be strong contenders for a top 3 pick. I mean, obviously it's a crapshoot. They could still win the whole lottery. I mean, that's still possible. But they've played their way out of it. But pretty clearly, this is not a team that's going to be a playoff team. This road trip has kind of reinforced that. They are not a team that is built to really withstand significant injuries, and here they are, with 2 players going down last night. I think that we're probably going to see a team that finishes 9th or 10th or 8th, and kind of. To me, I find it very interesting that at least they're going to be able to have a reason, I think, to play their guys and to play hard and to keep guys on the floor this year, which which is going to be just better for the fan experience. I don't know what it does for them in terms of making them better in the long term, other than you've got guys like Shaden Sharp, Scoot Henderson, if he's healthy, getting to play with a full roster down the stretch. I obviously thought the Blazers should make moves. I thought that if you can get off Jeremy Grant, DeAndre Ayton, Anthony Simons, you do it. That said, trading any of those guys always felt kind of like a long shot. I know there was a lot of money moving around at the deadline, but look at the deals that happened and be like, where would you slot in Jeremy Grant? Like, who would have given for Jeremy Grant what they got, or what they gave up for who they got? For the most part, you saw teams either trying to get under the tax, or teams that had the flexibility to navigate and help facilitate deals doing that. There wasn't a lot of real buying in terms of, going and getting players who were more expensive and made your team more expensive, especially to get marginally better, which is what, the players the Blazers could have traded would have done. Robert Williams is the outlier to me. He's the guy who, financially you could have traded, who would have helped teams, but you probably had to get serious about what the price would be. Because I don't know, with his injury history, his availability track record, that you were going to get more than a couple of second-round picks. And the Blazers were insistent on a first rounder for him. And time will tell whether that was a prudent move or not. He got hurt in literally his next appearance after the trade deadline. I mean, that's the risk of holding on to Robert Williams, is that he's one injury away from being completely untradeable. That said, I don't think this team is ready to compete next year without still finding a real centerpiece player. But they are in a lot better position than some teams you look around the league, like, Phoenix, for example, where Phoenix has stars, but would you rather be Phoenix or Portland right now? Like, I guess the argument would be Phoenix has, can keep Devin Booker, and Phoenix is going to be a destination for free agents. But the Blazers have outs. They have assets to trade. They have young players who can either pop or that they can trade. So, I mean, I think the Blazers right now, you would say they have optionality, but I think you eventually want to see them cash that in and say, this is the team going forward. And that's, I think, what gets frustrating about all these trading periods that come and go without real progress is it's another, you're hitting pause again, as opposed to, actually finding an identity.
I think it's an interesting conversation for a different day of which would you rather be, because one is kind of the budding joke, but they've got a new owner flush with cash, willing to make aggressive moves, and we have a team that might be for sale in 3 years that we're not really sure if this even regime will be here. I will ask you a two-parter to get you out of here, Bill, because we appreciate your time. So kind of what you're hinting at is kind of one of my first questions. You buy that they were aggressive at the deadline, or they're going to be aggressive? And what is your takeaway of Joe Cronin so far in his tenure as the general manager?
I don't know how aggressive they could be at the trade deadline, because they were not in a position to be buyers, right? But, I think that they were I think they wanted to do the things we're talking about. I don't think that they were sitting on their, sitting back. I think they knew what the market would be for trading any of their more expensive veterans, and I think that they realized that it would require them to surrender assets. If you want me to take Jeremy Grant, you're giving me a first-round pick. If you want me to take DeAndre Ayton, you're giving me 2 first-round picks. And that would have been imprudent. That would have been, as much as I think the Blazers need to find ways off these guys to sort of, redirect, obviously, DeAndre Ayton comes off the books in a year. Robert Williams comes off the books in a year. Anthony Simons comes off the books in a year. That is a strategy, too. That just isn't what they have signaled in terms of, this idea of, building around the young guys and rebuilding through the draft. So I don't think that you wanted them to be too aggressive where they're giving up assets to clear the books. So I think that they were probably aggressive enough, because even though it feels like inaction, it's not the end of the world that they still have these guys for another 3 months and maybe a year. It just feels like being stuck. But even being stuck, you're not taking on bad money, and you're not hung up beyond 2026. So there is some method to the madness. Joe Cronin, again with Joe, like, I think that you can point to the good things, and I think you can point to bad things. And I think I do think he got a good return on Damian Lillard. That was a difficult situation, one of the more difficult situations the Blazers GM has been in. I thought he navigated the actual Lillard trade pretty well. I have a lot of questions about how they even got to a Lillard trade. I think they were years behind on trading Dame. But that's a Neil Olshey thing, and also Joe Cronin's mission when he was hired was to build around Dame. So he couldn't come in and trade him on day one. Like, let's say if they'd hired Danny Ainge probably trades Dame in 2023. So it's different. That said, the Jeremy Grant contract I don't understand. Most of the league thought that DeAndre Ayton, was a stay away. But you get DeAndre Ayton and you get Tumani Kamara. So does Tumani Kamara justify these 3 years of kind of wading through the DeAndre Ayton mess? I think reasonable people could disagree on that. But I do think that at some point, Joe Cronin has to be aggressive and make a move and try to say, this is our team. And he's done a lot of sort of setting the table and hasn't really acted. And that's sort of what I think everyone is waiting for. And the Denny Odby, and I think if I was going to try to frame an argument against Joe Cronin, it would be a lack of execution of whatever the plan is, right? The plan was to build around Damian Lillard. He was unable to build around Damian Lillard. The plan now is to rebuild through the draft. He made a team that was too good. And not too good, go, surprise everybody and make the playoffs, but just too talented to be as bad as they were supposed to be. I had a conversation, I remember, with somebody from the Blazers. I'm not even protecting my source here. I don't remember who it was, but I was talking to somebody last summer, and I was looking at the roster, and I'm like, Jeremy Grant's a competent basketball player. Anthony Simons is a competent basketball player. Denny Avdia is really good. Tumani Kamara is going to be really good. DeAndre Ayton can be a competent basketball player. Is there a chance that this is accidentally a 30-win team, and they're not as bad as they're trying to be? And I remember whoever I was talking to said, we've talked about a lot of scenarios for next season. Being too good isn't one of them. And
7 wins away.
I know that that tanking isn't fun, but I think that there's different forms of tanking. And what I wanted for this team this year was to be fun bad. Win 20 games by, playing your young guys, having the occasional moments of surprise and losing, but people being able to see sort of the growth of your young guys. This team right now is too good. You have not successfully executed the mission of being one of the 3 worst teams and having, a clear shot at the top of the lottery. Yeah. That was the strategy. And the strategy right now is now you have to adjust on the fly and sell it, because this was not what anybody was anticipating. So you're having to sell a new strategy on the fly that you did not anticipate happening, and that's hard.
It's a really good way of putting it. Bill Oram, he's a columnist of the Oregonian. Go give him a follow on Twitter at Bill Oram. You can read him, obviously, at OregonLive.com and in the Oregonian. Hope you're bracing to survive the snow and ice on Thursday and Friday. We always enjoy the time, Bill. Let's do this again soon.
I'll have plenty of time when I'm stuck at home in the ice store. So,
there you go. Well, we won't be here Friday, but maybe we'll call you on Thursday. So we'll see how the weather goes. There you go. Bill Oram, the columnist at the Oregonian. The Daily Ticker, as always, brought to you by Pelican Brewing Company. Did you know, Bob, that they have 4 locations at the Oregon coast?
Oh, it's beautiful at the coast today.
Where you can fly over to a Pelican location, enjoy an epic view and a local brew all year long, including Valentine's Day this weekend. Looking for something to do? Pelican Brewing looks forward to seeing you at the coast. This is why Swag had no faith in us. Not only are we not back by 8:20, it's 8:22.
Hey, how about that?